Hello and welcome to Anteron's rather irregular Dose of Atheism, episode 3. People that are asking, why do you not call yourself an agnostic instead of an atheist, or simply claim that my position is that of an agnostic rather than an atheist without even knowing what my position actually is, or bothering to understand the differences between being an agnostic and an atheist, are nothing but trolling, in my opinion. It is one that really pisses me off and annoys the hell out of me. I'm always asking myself, and right here I would like to ask these people, does anything about my position change if you relabel it in a way that is more to your liking for some weird reason that is all your own? Does it change anything about the fact who has to provide reasons and justification for the beliefs they are holding? Is it moving the burden of proof somehow? But I am getting ahead of myself and should rather first have a look at what we are actually talking about. Atheism comes from the Greek word atheos. The A stands for without and theos means God. Hence, without God, or in a wider sense, without belief in the existence of a God, or even without religion. Agnosticism, on the other hand, means without knowledge. Or it can be understood that something is by design unknowable, or that we are unable to make a knowledge claim about some proposition in either direction. It is not specifically linked to questions about the existence of God in any way, so it is useless standing on its own and without context. So the two labels deal with separate questions. Atheism with the question, do you believe that gods do exist? And agnosticism with the question, do you know that gods do exist? If I ask you, do you believe that a God exists? And you answer, I do not know. You can either mean that you do not know if you hold such a belief, which basically is admitting that you do not know what is going on in your own mind, because belief is a real dichotomy. You are either convinced by a proposition or you are not. You either hold a belief or you have doubts, which means you are not convinced and do not consider the proposition as true or most likely true. You do not believe the claim that is made. Believing something is not a conscious choice. A proposition either makes sense to us and we accept it as justified based on sufficient evidence, or we reject the claim as unjustified if there is no or insufficient evidence. The brain does that without conscious input. If you are standing on top of a 10-story building, you will have a hard time willing yourself into believing that you can step over the ledge and you will just fly away and not die. Look into yourself and find out what your position is instead of avoiding the consequences of the question. Or if your response to the question, do you believe that a God exists, is I don't know, it could mean that you do not know if a God exists and that the correct answer is basically unknowable. That is a nice sentiment, yes, but it does not answer the question at all. It's like taking an exam on biology, but you are giving answers about physics. It's a plain and simple failure to actually address the topic at hand. It is an evasion tactic, and it's completely beside the point because the question was not if you know that a God exists, but if you believe that a God exists. And if your answer is anything but yes in response to the question, you harbor doubts towards the proposition and are not convinced that it is true or most likely true. You either are a theist or a deist, depending on your definition of the supreme being that you believe to exist. Or, if you hold no belief that any God exists, if your answer to the question, does a God exist, is anything but a resounding yes, you are an atheist. Like it or not, accept the label or not, there is no position in between. I am very sorry if it hurts the feelings of people who identify as purely agnostic, but they are, in my opinion, simply not honest to us or to themselves. Does atheism actually mean that we hold the belief that there can be no God and that no gods can exist, and that we make these claims with 100% certainty and that we know for certain that there is no God? Absolutely not. There is a difference between the statements I believe that God does not exist and I do not believe that God does exist. It is the difference between a strong or agnostic atheist, a person who is convinced that no God does exist and thinks that they can intellectually justify that position, making the general counterclaim to theism and saying that theism in general is wrong. And B, a weak or agnostic atheist, a person who just does not hold any belief in the existence of God because there has, to my knowledge, never been any evidence presented that would justify the proposition that any God or gods do in fact exist, but who recognizes that disproving the God claim in general is basically impossible as long as the definition of the God presented is not logically incoherent and self-contradicting. Like, for example, a non-interfering deistic version of a God which is vague and unfalsifiable, but not inherently logically self-contradicting. The agnostic atheist does not make the counterclaim to theism in general and does not say that theism in general is wrong. They just state that it lacks evidence to justify the belief, but it cannot be shown to be false as long as the God presented remains logically coherent. My position of either agnostic or gnostic atheist changes depending on the God presented. And it should by now be clear that agnostic, just taken for itself, does tell us nothing really. It does not even state what it is referring to and is not a middle position between belief and non-belief. We all just assume that when somebody says, I'm an agnostic, that this somehow refers to a position towards the existence of God, because that is where the term is very often used. But actually, it can be used in many other circumstances as well. I am, for example, an agnostic towards the historicity of Jesus. I do not see sufficient evidence to warrant accepting the claim that one person named Jesus, Yeshua or Joshua actually is at the root of the mythical stories the Gospels tell us. If pressed and asked what I believe, I would have to say I see no reason to believe that a man named Jesus ever walked the earth, but I would rather withhold judgment on it and most definitely do not know either way. But in any case, since it is a factual and naturalistic proposition, with at least the possibility of finding sufficient evidence to support either conclusion, and it is at least in theory falsifiable, it is not 100% comparable to the God claim, which rather demands faith without even the possibility of sufficient evidence. Furthermore, I would call myself an agnostic towards the proposition that alien life exists somewhere else in the universe, especially intelligent life. There are good arguments, especially from statistics, like for example the Drake equation, for such an assumption. Still, I do not believe that there must be intelligent life somewhere else in this universe, and I most definitely do not know that there is. So, the term agnostic has nothing to do with the question of the existence of any God. Once more, I am agnostic about many things, and in particular, I am an agnostic atheist towards a vague, imperceptible, castrated God that, for example, deists believe to be real, about some entity that created the universe and all but disappeared in the act of creation. Do I actually believe that such an entity exists? No, but I am admitting that there is no way to disprove such claims because they are unfalsifiable from the outset. There is no reason to have faith in a being that is absolutely irrelevant, even if it existed, and that is completely imperceptible to humans, be it to our limited senses or the tools that we have developed to enhance them. To assume that the universe must have had a cause for its beginning, when there is not even definite evidence that it had a beginning in the common sense, and to special plead such a being into existence by claiming this entity did not have a beginning, but it always existed, does not make sense. We are looking for an explanation for the origin of the universe, but we are not asking any questions about the origins of this proposed first cause entity. But again, there is no way to disprove such a claim, and my intellectual honesty demands that I admit to such a fact. Why do these attempts to make me into an agnostic really piss me off? Because I do not see what the opposite side is gaining from waving around and discussing this big fat red herring, and waste my time going round in circles about it. Why not ask what position I hold towards your particular God claim, instead of attempting to label me in a way that I do not agree with and that logically, as explained, makes no sense, because the term agnostic in and of itself is not even connected to a discussion about the existence of God and has nothing to do with my beliefs, but with what people know and claim to know. If you have a problem with the term atheist, let us do away with it for the sake of argument and just call me a non-believer. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this and maybe found it helpful, please like and subscribe, and I see you the next time on my irregular dose of atheism or on theistic pearls of wisdom, and I leave you with my revised atheist mantra. A God that has no evidence for its existence, that cannot be detected in any reliable and verifiable way, is indistinguishable from a God that does not exist. There can be no reason to believe that such a God exists, even if in fact it would exist, and it cannot be appealed to as the cause for anything, be it the universe or as the source of some holy book. It would have to be shown to exist independently before such appeals can be reasonably made, and no believer ever came close to do that.